Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. For today's episode, it is a first for the podcast. Criminally, we have never had an episode dedicated to a graphic novel before. I thought graphic novels weren't for me. Aside from loving the Heartstopper series by Alice Osman, I had never seeked out further novels. And after hearing countless recommendations for Alison by Lizzy Stewart, I realised my time had come. A few months ago, I got a glass of red wine, sat on the sofa, and spent the evening reading Alison cover to cover. And I arose from that experience a changed woman. And as soon as I saw Lizzy Stewart had a forthcoming graphic novel, I knew I had to move heaven and earth to get her on the podcast. Lizzy Stewart is an author and illustrator based in London. She writes and illustrates books for both children and adults. In 2017, her picture book There's a Tiger in the Garden won the Waterstones Children's Book Prize and a World Illustration Award. Lizzy has taught courses at the Tate and on behalf of the National Gallery, and currently teaches illustration at Goldsmiths, University of London. Her essay Walking Distance was published in 2019. Her debut full-length novel Alison was published in 2022, and now her latest graphic novel, The Wreck, is here, out tomorrow, and published by Jonathan Cape. Here to talk all about it, welcome Lizzy to A Pair of Bookends.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. It'll be fun, I think.
I hope it will be. I've been really excited for this. But before we dive into you and your book, I do like to start by asking what you're currently reading.
I am so on the kind of cusp of book coming out. I think this happens to lots of people. Your brain goes a bit, I guess, wrong. Wrong? Yeah, I think wrong is the word.
Everything's a bit
So,
muddled.
yeah, I feel a bit scatty and a bit
Yeah.
scattered and not always the most focused these past few weeks. So I've been sort of bouncing between books, but currently I am on Practice by Rosalind Brown, which is about a student writing an essay. It's very kind of just a focus down. The plot is literally a student writing an essay on Shakespeare's sonnets and kind of yeah, it's so far holding my very poor attention, and yeah, I'm enjoying it.
That sounds fun. Is that an old book? Is it new?
It's from a couple of years ago,
Okay.
and I think was very well reviewed and very, yeah, well received. But does seem to have vanished. And then a couple of people I know had read it recently. Obviously, passionate booksellers pressing it into people's hands. It's nice to go back and hoover up what you missed a few years before. I think the
Mm.
kind of mania of constant new titles and new publications mean that sometimes stuff gets lost.
Yeah,
So.
it's hard, isn't it? Because you see stuff on your shelf that you were so excited to get hold
Mhm.
of, and then you're like, well, I've not even got around to it yet. And I don't know why it's really bad that it sort of loses that like shiny appeal.
Yeah, right. Yeah. There's definitely things that yeah, I've been carting around for ages, just like, yeah, I can't wait to be the person who's going to pick up this book, but I've
Yeah,
not got there yet, because I yeah, have had my head turned by something else. So I'm just trying to work through that backlog of yeah, of stuff that's not from right now, which is also often a more relaxing way to read anyway, to
yeah,
quite
definitely.
so in the present moment.
I feel
From
inspired. I need to do the same.
yeah, let's delve into the past, even just a
Yeah, let's get into
couple of
our
years back.
backlogs, guys.
Yep.
Look at what's gathering dust on our shelves.
So much.
I want to ask you about the sort of process of becoming a graphic novelist. Did you always want to both write and illustrate?
So I studied illustration and I worked as a freelance illustrator for some years. And I think so I went to university in what, like 2005, and it was a real you chose your one pathway. I think like the narrative around what you studied, what you made a job was quite singular. And
Hmm.
obviously because of various financial crashes and the unreliability of jobs these days,
Hmm.
people are much more open to having a few different routes through life, to having multiple hats that they put on professionally. But I think I felt quite singular. I was like, I'm an illustrator now. Even though I'd always loved literature, I'd always loved writing. I think it also felt like quite a bold statement to say that I wanted to write. It felt more exposing. I suppose I didn't feel
Mm.
as confident as I did with image making. So I was an illustrator for a while, and that felt like that made sense. And then I did a picture book, I guess, like 7 years into working as a freelance illustrator. And I kind of wasn't expecting to do a picture book. I suppose it was always like, it was buried subconsciously, I
Mm,
think, the idea that I might do books, but I was quite happy being just an illustrator of kind of magazines and odds and ends. And during the process of making a few picture books, I also started experimenting with making comics in the kind of background. I realized that I could make a comic in about a month. I could make like a 30-page comic if I really, it wasn't good, it wasn't like neatly drawn or anything, but I could really power through and do a short narrative in a month and then print it and sell it, which is the real difference between, I guess, literary publishing and comic publishing, is that it's really normal, encouraged, and celebrated to self-publish. So I was getting work out there in that way. That was like dipping my toe in the waters of writing and illustrating at the same time. And so it was like a slow build. And I think I sort of had to trick myself into doing it, into feeling confident enough to do it and to feel like it was a thing that people would be interested in. Because it's
mm,
not, I suppose the books that I make aren't kind of classically in the form of a graphic novel. They've got a bit more text,
yeah.
got a bit more, I suppose they relate closer to children's books in some way, to like books for older children, kind of chapter books with illustrations and stuff. So I think I had to take a slow run up to it and then suddenly was like, oh, I've done it. I've fallen into it. Even though it wasn't a fall, it was intentional. But yeah, you have to fool yourself a little
Mm.
to accepting that that's what you're doing, because otherwise it feels like quite a mad endeavor.
Yeah, fair. Um, I really want to ask about Alison before we get
Mhm.
into the wreck. I know you're here to chat about the wreck, and I won't keep on
No, no,
Alison for
no.
long, but I did love it so much. But I think I really want to ask about, because to me, like, and I'm very much a literary fiction girl, so I heard from so many people, you need to read Alison, like you need to read this, and that was constantly like pushed on me, like Hannah, you would absolutely love this, and for me, I heard about that book more than I've heard about most graphic novels.
Mhm.
Why do you think that sort of, I don't know if it would be classed as like commercial success, but why do you think that reached more readers than the average graphic novel would?
I think there were I suppose a few things. I think,
By the way, I hope that doesn't come across as me
no,
belittling
no, I
graphic
know what
novels
you
at all. I'm
mean.
not trying to.
I like so I love graphic novels. I love illustrated fiction, and I think the barrier for a lot of people to that is literally finding the thing that you like. Everything
Mm,
that you read, whether it's literary fiction, horror, crime, sci-fi, kind of biography, it all exists in graphic
mm.
form. There are lots of different avenues for you to go down, but it gets grouped under this umbrella term of graphic novel, like that's a genre, and it's not. It's a form. It's like
Yes, yeah.
poetry. That's the way it's packaged, but it's not. It's sort of, it has no indication of what the storytelling's like, but it's all grouped together in the on the bookshelf,
Mm,
right? Like when you go to a bookshop, it's all there in one, and you have to pick through and find the thing that feels like your stuff. But there's really no guidance for that. Often, I think a lot of booksellers, it's changing now, but a lot of booksellers were like, oh, I don't really know anything about that, but it
mm,
looks fun. And so I think a lot of people's barrier was like, how do you find what you like? And a thing that I did, so I made Alison through lockdown, but I did know that I wanted to make a graphic novel for people who read what I read.
mm.
So literary fiction, as you were saying, like who were interested in the kind of stories that I was interested in. And I also wanted to package it in a way that meant it could sit alongside those books on a shelf. So
Yeah.
I wanted it to be smaller. I knew that from the start. I wanted it to not be an outsize, heavy, cumbersome object. You need to be able to put it in your bag, even though their hardback is pretty chunky, but it's not too big. Yeah, it had to feel like a book that wasn't daunting to pick up.
Mm,
And I think picking up those books can feel scary. And I know lots of people have been like, oh, I don't really know how to read a graphic novel. So there's also, in the way that it's packaged, the mix of prose and illustration is like to give you a breather, to like allow the story to sink in. I want it to be like a pleasurable reading experience. I think, yeah, I was thinking about you when I was writing it,
thanks
not
so
to be a
much.
creep. Um, in the least psycho way of saying that. But like, yeah, the people that don't read this stuff but enjoy reading are the people that I wanted to read this book. And I was really lucky that Serpent's Tail, who published Alison, were on side with that and up for giving it a go and experimenting and finding out, working out how we could find those readers. Yeah, they were like, they were really, really great with it. And I don't think it would have worked so well had they not wholeheartedly been like, yeah, let's give this a bash. Let's try and figure this out. Yeah.
It must be really frustrating though that it is sort of, as you said, grouped under the sort of umbrella of graphic novels, because when I was reading it, I was like, this does feel like I'm Sally Rooney obsessive, and so this feels like, you know, it should be sat alongside, you know, Sally Rooney, Meg Mason. Nobody is coming into my brain right now, but it's, you know, very much like it's one for the literary fiction girls. Like it's
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so because like they were, you know, those are people that I was certainly thinking about. And yeah, that's not to say that I'm not. I suppose I don't mean that the term graphic novel is like derogatory or anything because I'm
no.
proud to be making illustrated books. But I think that the way it gets that work gets piled together
Mm,
prohibits readers from finding what they want. And like if a reader sat down with me and told me like I read this, this, and this, I could find you the graphic novels that you need to find. But like my friends make graphic novels, I make graphic novels. I kind of I'm very immersed in this world. So that knowledge doesn't necessarily translate
mm,
outwards very easily. And yeah, and certainly I feel like people would, because when you find a book with pictures in, it's exciting. It's a treat. Like when you read a biography and it's got photos in the middle, you'll
yeah.
always go to the photos. So I think if that I do feel like if those books, if our books were dispersed alphabetically
Yeah.
in the sections they were in, people might find the thing that would really, you know, delight them.
Yeah, they'll be surprised.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
at the things they'll find.
Yeah.
I think we should get into your new book, The Wreck, because I'm very, very excited to talk about this. Could you give us the sort of elevator pitch? I know it's so annoying to have to do it.
I just haven't done it yet, really, you know, out loud to another person. I mean, I have, but in a like, I guess, what's it about? So it's about two couples, and the two women in each couple were best friends at university, but they haven't seen each other for a while. And one of them, Fran, comes to the other, Charlotte, with a proposition that she is in possession of a quite nice country house, and they're up for like trying something out. So does Charlotte and her partner Bill want to move in sort of as their lodgers, but also as their friends, as a kind of way of living that's fun and social and kind of community focused in their, I guess they're in their early 40s. So that's kind of the setup, that there's two couples and there's one beautiful country house. And then, yeah, stuff
Lots of things unfold.
unfolds.
All manners of chaos.
Yeah, yeah.
I want to start with the setting, which is what the title is, of course, based on. That is the wreck, and as you said, it is this big house in the countryside. What inspired this house and this setting?
Well, the house exists. So the house is a house that I have been to and spent time in. When I was a teenager, one of my friends was from the private school in the centre of Plymouth, and I was from, you know, a comprehensive, not in the centre of Plymouth, but we would hang out at his house, which was the first fancy house I'd ever been in. And not, I mean, in retrospect, not it's not that fancy. And I think also, yeah, in the book it's not actually like a country estate or anything. It's just a big house. And if
Mm,
you haven't, as I hadn't, been in a large many-roomed house, and you've only, like, everyone in my town lives in the same semi-detached
yeah,
2.5 to 3 bedroom kind of
the half is important.
yeah, purple Dutch house. If you got the half, it was really sucked. That was a small room. But yeah, like everyone lived in the same house. So the first time I went to this house, it was like, oh my gosh, people live differently.
Yeah.
And it really stuck in my memory. And when I came to write this, the house, I needed to be able to move through it. I
Mhm.
needed to be able to like work out, oh, if you're in this room, could you hear someone in the next room? Could you, how far is it to the kitchen? If you were stood in this doorway, what would be behind you? And actually, my friend's house was like so etched in my memory as a place that really kind of moved me as a teenager. I think it
Mm,
was like, oh, this is beautiful. And I've not really been in a place like it since, not with, you know, short of like National Trust properties. I don't know anyone who lives like that. So I took this house as the basis for it. Also because I felt about that house, I think the way that Charlotte feels about that house sort of
yeah.
slightly caught up in it. It's like it feels very romantic to be in this kind of place, kind of
Yeah.
not wanting. She doesn't really want to like let go of it. And I think, yeah, when you're somewhere, like it's like when you go on holiday,
Yeah.
you you know, sometimes you stay in a place that's like, oh my God, I think this is my place. I don't think anyone else should be allowed to live here. This is,
Yeah.
you know, and that's I wanted that feeling to exist within the walls of the Rec, which they call it the Rec, but it is the rectory, the old rectory. That's where that comes from.
It's funny, isn't it, when you find somewhere that's kind of so far removed from your own life. I remember when I was younger, my nana took me to, I don't know, I've never seen these people again, so I'm like, did I imagine this? But she took me to some kind of party, and it must have been like really rich friends of hers that I've never heard of since. So again, it could be my imagination, but they had a pool in the like basement of their house, and I was like, what is going on? It was like the most magical thing.
Yeah.
And I assumed from this one party, because at that age, like you do assume things, and I was like, this is it now, this is my life, I'm going to see them all the time. Never saw them again. Never got to go in the pool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. One of my friends, her like she called her aunt, but I think it was like her mum's old best friend took me and my friend for the day, and she lived somewhere, maybe it was in Cornwall, maybe I don't know. We drove a long way to get there, and she had a pool, and I was just it just completely blows your mind
It
when
does.
you've been in a very consistent setting, which like most suburban towns in the UK are like, there's not much variation. The
Yeah,
houses are all kind of the same house, slightly different iterations, different generations of the same size house. And then suddenly to be in a place with a pool was like,
yeah,
you can't really compute that this is here all the time. She
yeah.
always has this pool. This is wild. Yeah,
Crazy.
nuts.
Or if you've got like a massive garden, you're like, what is
Yeah,
going on?
yeah, yeah. Complete mind blowing.
Honestly. I really want to ask you about the four characters that are living within the wreck when they eventually do live together. So we have Charlotte, we have Francesca, Bill, and Adrian.
Mhm.
Could you tell us a bit about creating these characters and how you sort of settled on Charlotte as the narrator?
Ooh, how did I do? There's like some necessity that happens that like in order for the plot to exist, certain characters need certain traits. I needed Fran to be sort of an organizer, slightly, yeah, quite bold, quite maternal. She's wants to curate her home. She wants to
Mhm.
look after everyone. She wants everyone to have a nice time. She wants big dinners. Yeah, she wants a lovely life. So she had to be like a quite enticing, maybe sometimes a bit selfish or insensitive,
Mm,
accidentally kind of person she had to kind of orchestrate the whole situation.
yeah.
So yeah, a character sort of forms out of necessity, and then her partner Adrian would have to be in contrast to her. So she's a TV producer. He is a photographer and war photographer. So he's got some of his own stuff going on.
Yeah.
He exists sort of slightly in opposition to her, but they seem to complement each other. They've been together for a long time. And then Charlotte and Bill. Charlotte is an art critic, so she had to be more of an observer. She had to be maybe someone whose resentments had the potential to get slightly out of hand, someone who
Hmm.
maybe felt like they weren't able to achieve the things they wanted to, maybe a
Yeah.
bit frustrated. And also but like sharp, and like I wanted her to be someone she does see things quite accurately. She just doesn't necessarily behave. She's a tricky one. And then her partner Bill would have to be the balance to someone who had the potential to be a bit prickly. And so he's like a very sweet, very likable presence, but maybe sometimes that likability can feel like a trap to Charlotte, can feel
Yeah.
like a slight manipulation to be just the nice guy all the time. And there were like I was drawing the main bulk of the story happens in the kind of mid 90s. So the way that they looked came into it quite early, obviously, because I'm drawing, so I'm like sketching as well as writing about them. And things like realizing that Bill had like quite sweet floppy hair and a beard and would always be in like a very worn out t-shirt and
Hmm.
shorts. because he's a carpenter, but he's also just not, he doesn't really try. He doesn't really ever have to try because he's just so nice. Whereas Charlotte is maybe more angular.
She has like
Um,
short hair, and
she has,
talks
she has
about
more,
it. It's no longer kind of relevant like it used to
yeah,
be when she
yeah.
first saw it on like pop stars and
Yeah, it was like a statement, and now it's just her hair. But she's got my mum's hair, and she's yeah, like it was interesting to be like, oh yeah, I've taken that from there. You only realize after you've drawn something a hundred times that you're like, oh yeah, I have stolen that from that person. Whereas whereas Fran is like softer, and yeah, so they all have to be like visually separate from each other. Coming up with characters is really fun for a graphic novel.
I bet.
Yeah. It's, and I think writers should draw their characters. I think even if you're horrible at drawing, which I kind of
Which
don't
I
think
am.
anyone is. No, you're not. No, no one's horrible at
Help
drawing.
me, Lizzie. I can't do it.
Just they're always interesting. Even if someone is like someone who says they're horrible at drawing. If an illustrator looks at their work, they're like, oh God, I wish I could draw that shape so wonky and so lovely. But drawing your character, you just learn stuff about them. It's just like, oh yeah, I don't think they do wear their hair like that, or they would always wear this item of clothing, or they do kind of stand on that angle, or do always have their arms folded. The way that you're drawn to drawing someone, or the way that
Yeah.
you, yeah,
It's
is
interesting the sort of things that you pick up on, isn't it? I really liked the moment as well where Charlotte is talking about wanting to explore her style because she's
Hmm.
always stayed with that same style and how kind of experimenting with it feels so exposing. And
Yeah,
I was like, that is so true. Why is it so embarrassing to like want to toy about with your
July.
style?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think particularly at that time, but particularly someone who was like academic,
Hmm.
and I think I probably felt this when I was at school, that was like that being a certain kind of person precluded caring about certain things,
Hmm.
and like you couldn't be seen to be interested in both. Whereas now I do think it's much more accepted to be like someone who likes books and enjoys dresses or
Yeah.
whatever. It's those all those things kind of we've realized don't have to be separate, and it's ridiculous that we were judging people for. But I think Charlotte still has a lot of that internalized misogyny and judgment about things that she thinks are frivolous or beneath her, but that she also feels like, oh my God, I do want to try that stuff. I just don't know how. And that's sort of, she's in this bind like all the time over a lot of different things, but she's always a bit knotted up, whereas other people around her find a way to be free.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's why it's probably great that she was the narrator because, as you said, like she's very sharp with her observations. You know, she really does like closely observe people, and she has such a fascination of the people that she's living with, and she really notices things that maybe other people might not clock on to.
Yeah.
I think I really want to ask you about the fact that I mean, we do go back and forth between looking at what their life was like at university, but we spend the majority of our time with them in their 40s. And I wondered what it was about that sort of period of your life that appealed to you. Do you think there's more of a freedom? Do you think you care less? Like what I mean, I say that, but Charlotte definitely
She
cares.
cares more. She will never stop caring. So when I wrote the first draft, they were, or not even the first draft, the first month of writing, they were all in their 20s. So it sort of
Oh
went
wow.
from being students straight into this situation. And that was fine. And I think I could have written that book, but it felt weird. I guess when I started the book, I was 37, and I'm 39. Um, and it's just suddenly felt ridiculous that I was writing backwards.
Mhm.
When I could have been imagining, like I have, friends in their 40s. I'm on the cusp, and no one's got their life together. No one
No.
is resolved, and it seemed ridiculous that because I felt like there would be this kind of tangled plot that could only apply to really young people. And it's like, of
Mhm.
course, it applies to people in their 40s. You are not resolved. You are not finished just because you've reached a landmark age. So there was that, and then there was like some logistical stuff, like I wanted their careers all to have bedded in enough that they might feel set in some ways, and that, certain characters will have achieved great success and certain other characters might not have. So there's that. Yeah, I think increasingly as I grow older, I do want to read into that space in front of me, like where, you want to see where people have what people have done before you. And I think, yeah, all of that stuff kind of fed into wanting these characters to be slightly older. Yeah, and certain worries will have disappeared, I
Mm,
guess. But other worries have taken their place, and some worries are the same forever. They're just a gift you get to carry all of your
yeah.
life.
I think that was the
Yeah.
refreshing part though. Like you think that people reach a certain age and they've got it all together, and
Yeah,
actually they don't.
I don't think they do. No, people are just people forever. Yeah.
I'm 31 now, and I remember when I was in school thinking that I remember fully saying to one of my friends, when I'm 26, I'm gonna have two children and I'm gonna be married and I'm gonna be like a really famous actor. And that was like that's how it's gonna be. That's what's gonna happen. That's not happened. I am still trying to be an actor with multiple jobs and no children in sight yet, and I'm not married. What are any of us doing?
I mean, we've just been messing about. We've
We
not
have
had
just been
a
messing.
plan at all. Yeah, completely. And yeah, I remember my mum turning 40, and it's kind of mad to me now to be like, oh yeah, she would have felt like this, although she had two children, so she wouldn't have felt like me exactly. But yeah, that your projections of different ages when you're
Mm,
young are nuts, completely nuts. Yeah, and you are
yeah,
just muddling through, I think, all of the time.
it's always nice to hear somebody else's muddling through because I always am. But one thing I did love about this sort of age that they're at is I am always drawn to stories of female friendship, and I think there's a real intimacy there, and there is especially with Charlotte and Fran. And I think the interesting thing about friendships is that obviously they change so much over the years. And I was talking to my friend about this the other day, that how friendships feel like they're sort of in seasons. And you might have a really strong bond with somebody, but then they might have children and you might not, and then you might slightly grow apart, or for whatever reason it might be. And I know there's a point in the book where you talk about the fact that they've sort of lost touch. They were really close and then they've sort of come back together. What sort of inspired their friendship, and what were you sort of thinking about when you were exploring Charlotte and Fran?
I'm really fascinated by friendship. And in Alison, I wrote Tessa and Alison, who are the
Oh my
kind
God,
of
don't even,
two
I
friends,
can't talk, it makes me want to cry. Don't.
two friends in Alison. They are truly soulmates. And I think
Yeah.
there I was writing about like my own closest friends and like them being the defining relationships of my life. Like I've been friends with these two women for since the first week of university, 20 years almost. No, 20 years, which is nuts, completely insane that we've managed to hang on to each other. And I think we are hanging on to each other quite desperately. And Alison and Tessa was this really uncomplicated, just like they just love each other and they are just the other person's person. They are very well balanced as friends. And then in this one, I wanted to explore, I think, two people who want to have that relationship and they want to be made for each other and they hope that they're made for each other, but maybe they're not, or maybe they can't figure out their route to it quite so easily.
Hmm.
And yeah, so they've gone through their 30s, which I think is quite a tricky time for friendship if you're because the different pathways that you're on in your 20s that felt quite random and like, oh yeah, they're over there, but that's fine, we'll come back together. They're doing that and everyone's trying different stuff out. And then in your 30s, those things bed in a little,
Yeah.
and the choices you've made suddenly have quite large repercussions on the way that your life works. And that is a tricky time for friendship. And you do suddenly feel like you're all watching each other in quite a specific way for minor, sort of looking out for minor infractions and like, did they not reply to that because they don't like me anymore, because they're judging that I didn't do this or I have done that, or suddenly you're on high alert and you're very sensitive to those changes because
Mm.
because you weren't expecting them, I think. I think no one expects their reliable friendships to change quite as much as I think they do in your 30s. And so I wanted to then explore what would then happen if you'd been through that period and tried to get back together, which would be lovely. And I think there's been a couple of instances of like friends who've moved away coming back. And it feels so exciting because through your late 20s and 30s, suddenly your friends are all disappearing. They're moving
Hmm.
home, they're moving to new cities, they're moving to different countries. And to get one back is like a revelation. It's so
Yeah.
exciting. And so they get very caught up in this idea that they've got their kind of best friend back. But yeah. then all this other stuff comes into play. But yeah, I'm fascinated by friendship, and then whether they could ever get beyond the kind of the mess that
Mm.
occurs in the book, whether you could work beyond that is also really interesting, and whether there would be a point in your life where you're but we were magic together, we were so good. Why would I let that go?
It's interesting
Yeah.
though, isn't it, how the lines kind of blur on like what is closeness and intimacy and what might be, I don't know, whether it's like taking it too far or like
Yeah, this was
what.
a totally. I mean, you're in London.
No,
Do you?
Manchester, Manchester.
Manchester
Yeah.
must be. Maybe it's the same in Manchester. Everyone has the chat where they're like, we could just get a house together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Together.
When my
Um,
friends moved to London, they were like, come join us.
yeah.
Like,
Um,
we can all
and
be together.
we can all be together. And the solution to the housing crisis is oh, we'll buy this house and we'll divide it up and we'll all live in here. Yeah. And so the plot of the story is sort of a lot about well, what would actually happen? And would they survive it? Would they be able to make it work if they actually could they ever have made it work, I suppose.
I was thinking a lot about that, and I mean, obviously, the novel does explore lots of themes of desire, and I've told you that I will be careful with spoilers, so I'll try to
Mhm.
be, but let's just say that the relationships become sort of entangled with that desire, and it does make for a messy outcome. Do you think it would ever be possible for four friends to sort of achieve success with communal living?
Absolutely, I'm sure they could.
Not that you're now the leading expert on communal living, but
Yeah, yeah. I've fully made this up, so I do not know what. Yeah, yeah, of course. I would say maybe the errors that these people make. It's in the middle of nowhere, so it's sort of they are very
they're
much
isolated.
reliant on each other. They are the world to each other, and that's a lot of pressure. Maybe they needed like two adjacent houses or something, not one.
They were supposed to split off in the
They were
house, but
supposed to split up. Yeah. So they were supposed to, when they arrive at the house, when Bill and Charlotte arrive at the house, there's sort of the suggestion, the plan is that there'll be like a kind of clearly marked line between like your rooms, our rooms. They'll come together. It'll be more like having a flat in the house where where there are lodgers. So they're not so involved in each other's lives. But it's just so exciting. It's just so exciting to be we're sort of like students again. Let's eat dinner. Let's have a party. Let's hang out in the garden. And they kind of fall in love with like the loveliness of it. Which again, going back to to being on holiday, you can fall in love with like comfort so easily because it's lovely. With
yeah,
oh, this is so easy. This is so much better than my real life. And I think they find it better than their real life. And so they forget that there does need to be some structure and some
yeah.
separation, I think, because
But
you would.
it's understandable, if
Yeah.
you were having the bulk of the cooking taken off you all the time because you're all cooking each other nice meals and you're all alternating and
Yeah.
it looks so fun and lovely. I would want that. I'd get
Yeah,
sucked into
yeah.
that life. Um,
Absolutely. I want to drink champagne in the garden on a big cushion
absolutely.
every day, please. But
That would be
I don't want the
nice.
other stuff. Yeah.
But there were a couple of images throughout the book that sort of appeared more. Again, don't know what the technical language is for this, but I'm going to try. But there were certain images that appeared more faded than others, and also when the characters' sort of edges bleed into each other.
Mhm.
Was that because of how these lines are sort of blurred between the characters? Like, where did those sort of images come from, or what did they represent? I'd say.
So, yeah, so there are a few like color images. There are they're more like illustrations. So there's stuff that's more like graphic novel, comic book style kind of panels with speech bubbles, and that's for like scenes and dialogue. And then there are standalone images, and the same happens in Alison, where my job as an illustrator, the job that I had traditionally was kind of comes to the fore. So that was to like take an idea, a feeling, a piece of text and summarize it with one single image. And so those images are sort of like illustrative responses to the mood of that moment or like
Okay.
the way that the characters are feeling and yeah, there are some that involve like there's slightly more abstracted, maybe not like visually abstracted but like thematically, yeah, less literal, I
Mhm.
suppose, more of a feeling. Yeah, and as they move through the book, often it is about edges of characters bleeding into one another or
Mm.
kind of the muddling of lives. And they're really fun to make because they're a really nice break from the kind of more repetitive drawing of the scenes where you're like drawing the same characters in the same situation, like in the same room over and over again, and trying to figure out how to make it a bit interesting to look at and not too monotonous. So it's nice to have a nice big color image every now and again. Same thing I said about Alison, like having a breather and having a moment to like, okay, that this image sort of summarizes that bit, and now we're moving on into the next bit.
I think it's really interesting as well how, like, reading your books has really made me think about like what certain images sort of provoke or, bring up in me. What kind of emotion does that bring up, or what does that make me think about that maybe like words alone wouldn't make me think about? And it shows up a couple of times in the book with different photos, whether that be your own illustrations or whether that be, Adrian's job as a sort of war photographer and the kind of images he might be taking. And then there's a moment that I told you before we started recording that I really liked, where they're wanting to make a gallery in the wreck and they're wanting to put together photos from their childhood. I'd love to know what you were thinking about in terms of those, different images. And yeah, I actually don't know if there is a full question there, but I just love the
Photos.
sort of contrast. Yeah, I love the
Yeah.
contrast of that. I think it's powerful.
I love photos. I love old photos. I use the kind of illustrations of photos a lot in Alison because I'd grown up, as many of us do, like reading family photo albums. Like you flick through photos of your parents or your grandparents. You're like, who's that? Who are they? Oh, did grandma have a different boyfriend then? What's going on there? And
The
all of
plot
that stuff.
thickens.
Yeah, like who is this man? What is going on? So yeah, like looking through that, and you realize that you can from photographs guess at a narrative or like explore an idea quite clearly. You can get to the bottom of things just from looking at photos quite easily. And so yeah, they gather their childhood photos because I love like when you see a photo of your friend when they're a child, like a tiny child, and you're like, I can see you, and I can see something else, and
Yeah.
it's so fascinating. They're so moving. And then I think photos in general, I guess, are there as a stand-in for images in general,
Mm.
which obviously, as I've made that my job and my life, I'm kind of fascinated by a relationship to them. After I finished Alison, I read The Years by Annie Ernaux, and she uses photos, she describes photos throughout that book in a way that is so like completely exactly think and feel about images, and what I was like, oh God, she's done the perfect version of this, and I can never do this. But yeah, talking about images as snapshots of moments that are kind of singular but also
Mm.
universal. You can look at a specific photo of someone when they're a child, and it is that person and that child, but it's also all children throughout time. I'm sort of fascinated and fixated. And yeah, like when I look at photos of my partner when he was a kid, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I can really see you there. And it's a strange feeling.
Yeah,
Like, I
definitely.
feel like I know this child and I never met this child. Yeah, fascinating.
I
Really, yeah,
remember
fun stuff.
my when my boyfriend's mum showed me a photo of my boyfriend when he was young, and he doesn't have many childhood photos, but this one just was like so gorgeous. He's just like against a climbing frame, and he's in like a very 90s like cool get up. He's got like a baggy jumper on, he's got these really cool trousers on, and I think he's only like 5 or something, and he's just like leaning on this like climbing frame, but like the coolest ever. And I was like, it's because I always perceive my boyfriend as like really cool and like, you know,
Yeah,
I don't know, he's got like the kind of swag about him, but like this photo, I was like, oh my God, like that is you. Like,
yeah. It's like the perfect distillation of that person.
yeah,
But then
yeah,
sometimes you see some people's photos and you're like, I can't equate that this is you at
yeah,
all. And that's
yeah.
fascinating as well.
I really wanted to ask you if there was a photo from your childhood that's really special to you.
There's quite a lot, but there's one so in Alison, a lot of the photos that are Alison's photos are actually based on like my family photos because I was using them as reference or kind of remembering images that I'd seen and drawing them with my characters in them. I think on the first page of Alison, there's a drawing of her in a swimming costume on the beach that is based on a drawing of my mum, a
Mhm.
photo of my mum, but because I remember that there's a photo of me that's almost identical. And so there was, there's this like, I don't what, like 25 years, I suppose, between me and my mum, and like decades apart, these two kind of red-haired girls with bunches in swimming costumes on the beach with the
Oh my
same
God.
expression. And I think, yeah, that's kind of magic. And I guess goes back to what I said, like that it's one specific child, but it's also all children. We sort of we make the same faces, we move in similar ways. Yeah, so that's one that I think of, and it's one that obviously I've used directly in my work. Yeah, but there's lots. I'm quite a photo person, I think. I like.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
looking at old photos, and I've got some by my bed that are just
Yeah.
like randomly scattered. Like there's not, they're not neatly framed or anything like that. They're just like a random assortment that I can sometimes just have a flick through. Because I feel like we don't really have like when I was younger, there'd be like like family photo albums, and you'd get to look through everything. Whereas I feel like people don't really do that anymore because they have social media or I don't know.
Yeah,
It's really sad.
it is a shame because when you go into someone's house, and they've got, it was a real thing, particularly in the 90s, where you'd go in and people would have like a giant clip frame and all these photos cut out and it would just be
Yeah.
full. And if someone has one of those in my house, I'm out of the game for an hour. Well, I'm like,
And who's that? And what were you doing there?
yeah, I love that stuff, and it does feel sad that it's less a part of our homes, or that the photos are kind of more curated and more staged and more tasteful. Like when you see a photo from like 1992 and everyone's sort of grimacing and looks a bit standing a bit awkwardly, or like someone's looking away. That's the good stuff. Yeah.
There's a really cute photo that my mum took of me and my sisters when we were little, and I'm the oldest, so I've got them both like my sister on either side of me, and me and my younger sister was like really smiley, and then my other sister just looks like a complete gremlin. Like she just looks so annoyed at the world, and you're like, you look at that photo of her, and you're like, if we just like cut her out and blew that up, like it looks like she was plotting to kill somebody. Like it's so good.
But is that the photo that your like family are like when they think of her, they're like, that's
Yeah,
you. Yeah,
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 yeah.
absolutely. She just
You're the
growled at people
gremlin.
when she was younger. She didn't want to talk to people. So that is, yeah, a perfect summary of what she was like as a child.
Yeah. And then
Um,
you sort of spend your life trying to like outrun those images. Be like, I'm
oh,
not that person.
absolutely. I am aware of time and
Yeah.
I'm aware I told you 45 minutes and I'm very sorry that I've definitely kept you over that.
No, no, no,
Um,
that's me.
before I ask for a recommendation, can I sneak in one more question? Have you got
Oh, yeah.
time? Great.
Yeah,
So one thing that I really love about your work and has no relevance to what we've just been speaking about, but I really want to ask about it is how you explore class, which is a theme that definitely showed up in Alison. And at one point in the rec, you write, I was right to resent those people. They did have everything that most people lacked. Then, as a reward for having everything, they were gifted even more. But social injustice was not the source of my resentment. I would have felt far less ashamed of it had that been the case. No, it was the fact that I could never really be one of them, and they knew that. They knew, and I knew. We all knew, and the knowing made me sick. And this really resonated with me. And I don't know if this, I feel like this particular moment is about class. It felt like that for me. But I'm curious why you think class is something that, well, do you think that class is something that your work will always be in conversation with? And why do you sort of think that is?
yeah, I need to try really hard to not like do feel like it is a fixation. I think like so it's just I think for a long time, particularly depending on where you grew up, like growing up just outside Plymouth in this town that joins onto the city. We're not like set, it's not like a village or anything. We're like on the edge of Plymouth. Just the world was quite consistent. And the
Mm,
thought of there being upper class, middle class, and lower class, it was just very abstract. It
yeah,
didn't really and now looking back, you're like, oh, there were levels within the students at school, and there were people who were living in probably quite extreme poverty, and then, different versions of life were taking place, but they're quite disguised. And then when I, firstly went to this large house and was like, oh my God, right, I see. This is different. And then when I went to Edinburgh University, which was just nuts, completely insane to go from Plymouth to Edinburgh and suddenly meet people who'd been to properly fancy private schools, who asked where you went to school, who asked what your dad did. And I was like, electrician in the Navy. And I remember going like, yeah, going on a date with this boy and him being like, oh, an officer. And I was like, no, an electrician. Like, just the assumptions, partially because I don't sound like I'm from Plymouth, but the assumptions that people made about your life were completely bizarre to me because in where I grew up, everyone knew about everyone could work out everyone more or less. So that was interesting. But then, yeah, I do. It's one of those things. It's so interesting in the UK that you can't change class. You can move through them, but you can't change how the world sees you necessarily. So you could grow up in a working class background and become very wealthy and
Yeah.
mix up a fancy people, but there is this like inherent knowledge, however well-intentioned and kind and benevolent those people might be towards you, you have it or they have it, someone has in it. We're quite oddly set in stone on that stuff in ways that other countries don't have, and which is why I made Bill Canadian, because he just is like outside of, doesn't see any of it.
Yeah.
And that kind of winds Charlotte up a bit because she's like, but it's there, and it affects me. Yeah, and the often the things, particularly through th our 30s, perhaps into our 40s, that class stuff can become quite tricky to navigate. We're like, oh, you got that money to buy that house, did you? Oh, you're going
Yeah.
on another holiday, are you? Oh, you,
It's
yeah,
really hard as well to not let that resentment creep in.
yeah,
You
yeah,
really
yeah.
have to like watch
Um,
yourself.
and I don't necessarily think that no one deserves judgment based on
Yeah.
the complete chance of how they were born.
Mm.
Obviously, if it's offered to you, no one's really turning it down.
No.
So,
God, I wouldn't.
no, who wants to buy me a house? I am on board. But that doesn't stop your internal judgments, I suppose,
Mm.
can make you mad. And I think some of this story is like, what if I went mad with this? What if these feelings that you can tamp down or rationalize and explain away, what if they kind of blew up inside you a bit? Um, yeah, kind of extrapolating out on those feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting as well that both Charlotte and Alison are working in the arts, and I think it's a whole other layer.
Yeah, totally. I think maybe it's one of the fields where it can become painfully apparent that there are two lanes and you've
Yeah.
got stuck in one and you don't know how to get into the other, or you are prohibited from getting into the other. And
Hmm.
yeah, so it felt really important. It feels really important to me to be writing these like lower middle class, working class, whatever women who are working in the arts, also who are from the West Country, because that is where I'm from, who are good at what they do, but are maybe seeing that there's some doors that are closed to them by virtue of that upbringing or the world that they are from. Yeah,
It
which is
always,
still the case, and
yeah,
will I think be the case until education in this country gets completely overhauled. Until
definitely.
like people talk about illustration being a very kind of middle class profession, and like of course it is, because how are these people going to spend? How is anyone going to spend this much money on a degree? But how are a working class family going to send their kid to university for that much money to do something as exploratory and silly as illustration, as wonderful as illustration is? It's never going to change until education is free, please.
That would be really nice. Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
remember when I went to college, my mum was like, "You're not doing a BTEC in performing arts. You're doing A levels. You need to, if you want to do drama, you can do it as an A level."
Yeah, and it doesn't matter how talented you are, or how driven, or how desperately you want to make it work, or how singular you are, how much you can be like, no, it's acting. That's
Yeah,
the thing. Or
yeah.
it's art, whatever it is. You have to make a sensible decision that maybe other people who have more of a cushion,
Don't have to think about that.
more connections don't have to think about. It's the connections is
Yeah,
is the galling part of it, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Massively. I could talk about that subject
Yes,
alone all
that's a
day.
different podcast, right? Just you women
100%.
raging. 2
No, but
hours.
I think I have kept you long enough now. We are out of time,
Yeah.
and I'm devastated because I could have spoken to you for another hour about your books and these characters, and I am just so pleased that I've managed to get you on. So thank you so much. Before you leave us, I do like to finish by asking for a recommendation. So what would you like to recommend to the listeners?
Okay, I'm pulling this one slightly out of thin air because I read it like 6 years ago, whenever it came out. It's going to be Lara Paulson's This Is the Place to Be, which is a short memoir by an ex-BBC News journalist. It really stuck with me. I think it changed the way I thought about some things. It's very exuberant, it's very energetic and alive, but also touches on serious things, but it's short. Oh, I feel like it's a good read and it sort of awakens something, some thoughts, some feelings quite promptly. Yeah, it's a good one. But that just I didn't know that was going to be the book that I recommended
Oh,
when
I
I started
love
this
that.
conversation. And then was like, that's the one that's in my head right now.
Oh, I
So,
love that. I
yeah.
definitely want to read that. But for the listeners, you should go ahead and grab yourselves a copy of The Wreck by Lizzy Stewart and also Alison, because they are both wonderful books. Walking Distance is also available, which I've not read. So I need to go and do that. Don't pull a face.
Yeah. Yes.
But I'll pop links in the show notes for all of those books and for other books that have been mentioned throughout this episode. Where can the listeners find you online, if anywhere, Lizzie?
I've been mainly on Instagram,
Instagram.
Lizzy Stewart.
And you do share your illustrations on there as well,
Yep,
which I
lots of
love.
drawings on there, and I guess on Substack. But that goes in waves. 'Cause-
Amazing.
yeah.
I can link both of those. And listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. That is all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Lizzie, for joining me. I've absolutely loved this conversation. So
Thanks so much for having me. It's been lovely.
thank you, and thank you, listeners, for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.